Welcome to an RPG in a Box Basics video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at light sources. So I'm going to start by explaining how to enable a light source and talk about what the different settings are that are in the light source options. We're then going to take a moment to discuss the light limitations that the current engine that RPG in a Box uses has, because RPG in a Box is currently using Godot 3.1. It will eventually be moved to 3.6 and then further down the line 4. But currently it's using version 3.1. And in version 3.1, we have to discuss the limitations that it has with lights, because you need to be aware of this limitation if you're going to use lights in your projects. So we're going to talk about those limitations. I'm going to show you what they are and how they sort of manifest themselves and how we can avoid them. Okay, how to work with those limitations. And then we'll end out by taking a quick look at scripting light sources, just so you can see how you can change lights at runtime, whether it's like turning a flashlight on and off, that kind of thing. So we'll use an example of making an attachable flashlight, and we'll make a button where you can turn the light on and off when it's equipped. Okay, we'll go to the asset library and we'll import a torch object. Let's import this one here. This will import with a light source already enabled. So what I'm going to do is just temporarily disable it. So we'll scroll down and we'll turn that off. Okay. So when you have a model that you want to emit a light, whether it be a torch or a flashlight or a lantern or something that glows, anything that you want to emit light, you can obviously have your model like this. In the model properties, you're going to find an option called light source. And by default, for models that you make, it's going to be off. So what you do is you just simply turn that on, and it will add this voxel to your model that's pure white on all sides with a light bulb image on all sides. And you'll notice it starts to emit light in a radius around your model. Okay. It's important to note before we get into the settings that when you add a light source to your model, it is on every frame. It does that automatically for you. So if your model already has animations, the light source is going to be on every frame, and you cannot delete a light source per frame. It's always going to be on every frame. So if you want to have a light off on certain frames, we'll discuss that in a second, but you can't just delete the light source. It's going to be on every frame of your model all the way through, just by enabling it. Okay, it's either on your model or it's not on your model. Simple as that. Okay, so let's go through the options quickly, and then we'll talk about some of the things to be aware of. So the first option is the type of light. So there's two types of light in RPG in a Box. There's omnidirectional and then there's spotlight. Omnidirectional basically means it's a light that emits in all directions. So as you can see, it sort of emits around a radius around the model. And if there was any sort of walls and floors and things around this particular torch model, those would be lit by this light. So it's a light that basically just emits in all directions. Whereas a spotlight, you'll see that when I enable spotlight, the light seems to disappear. But you'll actually see that it's faintly off the edge of the ground of the model here. And you'll notice that it adds this yellow arrow, which wasn't there before with omnidirectional, because it's in all directions, so there is no need for an arrow. But with spotlight, it is unidirectional, goes in one direction, so it tells you the direction that currently the light is going in. Okay, you can obviously tweak that by changing the angle and rotation settings further down. Okay, so that's spotlight and omnidirectional. So that's the type. Okay. Next, we have animated. So by default, if you want to change the brightness or the color or anything, the angle, the rotation, anything of your lights per frame, currently that doesn't work. So if I, for example, make this light brighter, let's say 5, okay, if I go to frame 2, it is also 5. If I go to frame 3, it is also 5. Every frame has kept that change, okay? But let's say I want the light to flicker, or I want it to pulsate, or I want it to change color over frames. Well, then what you're going to need to do is tick this animated box. And what that essentially means is that every frame will have its own version of these settings. So, for example, frame 1, which I'm on at the moment, currently has an energy setting of 5. If I go to frame 2 and I change that to 1, and I go back to frame 1, it's still 5. So now if I flick between the two frames, you can see they are changing. So whereas before they weren't changing, now they are. So if I go to frame 3 and I make a brightness of, let's say, 3, if I now play the default animation, you can see it flickers. Okay? I might, for example, go back to frame 2, where it's probably a bit too dim, and make this like 3, something like that. Maybe set this to 4, and then play. And now you've got a sort of flickering light. Okay? And obviously, if I was to place that into the map, that would play it when you're playing the game, and that would, you know, be a pulsating light or a flickering light or whatever you want to do. So that's how you animate a light source. You need to make sure this is ticked, because if it's not ticked, if I stop it and I turn that off, then all frames are going to have the same brightness setting or color setting or range setting. All of these are going to basically apply across all frames unless you tick that, and then each frame will have its own unique brightness, color, etc. So for example, with this ticked, I could go to frame 1 and keep that as orange, but I could go to frame 2 and I could make that suddenly green. I could go to frame 3 and make that blue, or just do something crazy. And now if I play this, now it's sort of like a nightclub, right? So color, I'll turn that off so it's not flashing at you. Color, energy, range, all of these things. I'm not sure about negative, but possibly. All of these things can be adjusted per frame if you want to animate them. Just out of curiosity, let's see if negative can be animated. It looks like it possibly can. So let's just play that. Yeah, looks like it is flicking on and off. So even negative can be animated. Anyway, so that's animated. I'm not going to spend too much longer on that. Let's go back to frame 1, turn this off so that this is the setting that all the frames use. Next, we have color. Should speak for itself. It's the color of your light. So in this case, it's a sort of orangey glow because it's coming from a flame, but you could set it to white if it's coming from like a fluorescent light bulb, or green if it's coming from something spooky, or whatever you want to do, right? So let's put this back to a sort of reddy orange. Next, we have the energy, which is essentially the brightness. So 0.1 will be almost invisible. 0 would be essentially off. And then I think 16 is the max. Let's just try 27 and see what happens. Yeah, so 16 is the max. So 16 is full bright. Let's put this to 3. Negative basically inverts the light. So basically negative will remove both light but also the color. So for example, if I set this to red, you'll notice that the negative of this, it will go blue. Okay. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why would you do that when you could just set this to blue if you wanted a blue light? Well, this isn't actually a blue light. What it's actually doing is it's removing red. So by removing red, it kind of goes blue, but it's a sort of weird blue, because if you look at the difference between that and setting this to blue, it's a sort of subtle difference. And it will be particularly obvious when you place a negative light on the map. So if I put this back to red and we click negative and we apply and save that, if you were to go to your map and place this light, let's go to the settings again for the light and let's put the range down to 1 for a second. maybe 2. Just check it's on all frames. Yeah, so you can kind of see that what it's doing is it's not really lighting this map at all. It's almost darkening it. It's got a sort of weird, spooky effect to it. So what negative is doing is it's removing both the color, but it's also removing the light, right? So it, it you can use negative for sort of creating darker areas rather than lit areas. So if you want this area to be sort of dark blue, sort of a blue that's removing red from the scene, but also darkening it, then you can do that. Whereas if we turn off negative and make this blue, it's not going to be the exact same blue, but it'll do. Then when you place this, you can see it actually lights. It's actually a light. It's lighting the wall blue. So it's adding light and blue to the scene. It's not removing light or removing blue or removing red in this case. It's adding blue and it's adding light. Okay, so there is a distinct difference between negative light and adding light. So, for example, if we were to change the color of this to white and then tip negative, obviously it's going to go black, but also you can see it's really dark. It's going to literally add darkness to your map. So if you really want to add real dark areas, then you can basically add a negative light, and it's really going to sort of take away the light from that area. So that can be used if you want a light that's the opposite of a light in a way. You really want to darken something, then you can use a negative light to do that. Okay, so that's the negative option. Play around with that. Your mileage may vary with that. Let's put the range back down. Next, we have range. Now, this is a really important setting that's going to come into play when we talk about the limitations, but just to quickly talk about for now what it is. This is basically the wideness of your light, how far it reaches. So 2 means it's in a sort of reasonably small area around. Oh, I need to save the light in a sec. So you can see it's in a reasonably small contained range around the model. But if I go back and I change this to 6 or something like that, now you can see that it's almost lighting the entire room. Okay, so the range is basically how far out does this light reach in a radius around the center of the model. Okay, because obviously in this case the light source is here, so it's in the middle of the model. So this is going to be the brightest point, and it's going to sort of go outward. Okay. Next, we have attenuation. Attenuation is basically how soft is the fade fall off, if you will, the fade to dark from your light. So this is the center source of the light. So how much does the light fade into darkness? So it creates a softening effect. So if I lower the range for a second to something that will just about fill the room, let's do 3. So this is what a attenuation of 1 looks like. Okay, you can't really see the edges of the light. You can sort of see where it's obviously not lighting areas, but you can't really see the defined edges of the light because it's very soft. However, if we delete this light, go back to the editor, the model maker, and we set this to 0.01, which is the lowest it can go. So even if you type 0, it's going to do 0.01 anyway. Okay, save the model, and now if I place it again, you can actually see the circle. There's no fall off at all. The light is fully bright until it reaches the range. Okay, so it's like a stage spotlight, right? It just literally boom, it's like someone's shining a hard spotlight on this section of the map. And so that's what attenuation does. It's how much fall off or how soft, how much light is being dissipated the further away from the center of the light source. 0 means it's not going to, so you just get a defined uniform brightness all the way to the edge of the range, and then it just stops. Whereas attenuation will soften it. And obviously, the higher the attenuation setting, the heavier the effect is on your light. So if we delete this again and go back to the model maker, if we put this to 1, obviously that's what it was before, so it's nice soft light. But if we set this to 2, it gets darker. So the whole light gets darker. 3, it's getting darker and darker and darker. 5, really dim. So if we save this model now and place it again, you see it's almost not lighting anything. It's almost like we've changed the range and the brightness, because we're basically saying we want a lot of fall off, which basically means it's dimming the light a lot. So you don't want to have a lot of attenuation to create a soft light. A little goes a long way. The difference between 0 and 1 is quite drastic. So anything in between 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, those are the sort of things you're going to be wanting to mess with. Anything above 2 and you're really going to start to be dimming the light, okay? So if you want your light to be bright but also have a soft edge, then attenuation of 1 is usually what you're going to use. Now, we're actually going to be using this attenuation setting in this video because it's actually very useful, and I'm going to talk about why it's really useful when that comes up. But for now, let's move on. So then we have the offset settings. Now, the offset settings are the position of this light source. So we obviously have forward and back. So if we slide those, we can see the light is moving forward and back. And then Y is left and right. Obviously, that's dependent on where you're looking. Obviously, if I turn the camera so I'm looking at it, then this is actually going to be forward and back. And this would then be left and right. But in essence, that's what these two X and Y offsets do. They do the forward, back, left and right of a light source. So let's try and position that back over the center of the model again. And then Z is up and down. Now, there's a couple of options that you don't see here because they're not for omnidirectional lights. So if we put this to spotlight for a second, you can see the light pointing off to the side. This angle setting was not there before. This is unique to spotlights. This is the angle of the light itself. You'll notice as I change that, the arrow isn't changing. So this is just the angle that the spotlight is emitting from. So if you want it closer to the ground, then increase the angle. If you want it less pointing at the ground, then you lower the angle. Okay, let's have the angle something like that. And then obviously you can do the offset like we did earlier, but now we can also edit the rotation. So X is up and down. So you'll notice that as I slide this, the arrow will point up or point down, and that will have a dramatic impact on the spotlight. But also, if we edit the Z rotation, it will spin round. So if you wanted, for example, a spinning light, like maybe a beacon or a siren, an emergency light that spins round, then you would frame by frame edit a Z rotation of a spotlight, right? And it would, go round and round and round. So that's spotlight. And we'll use spotlight in our flashlight demonstration, but we'll come to that later. So those are the settings that you have in light source. Okay, so hopefully that's explained them all and what they're used for. So now let's start talking about the light limitations that you need to be aware of in Godot 3.1 and obviously RPG in a Box because it's using Godot 3.1. So Godot 3.1 has a light limitation of 8 objects per light source. Okay, so what does that mean? So if I go to this model and I've currently got a light source on it, and it's got an energy of 6. Energy, this setting here has nothing to do with the light limitation. So it does not matter how dim or bright your lights are. Okay, you can have them as bright or as dim as you want. What does affect the light limitation is this setting here, the range. Okay, for now I'm just going to set this to 2, and I'm going to set the attenuation to 0. And we'll save this, and we'll go back to the map editor, and we'll place this light down. Okay, so let's put it in this corner here. It's not really the corner, but we'll place it this side of the room here. So as I spin round, you can see that this single light source, because it's got a range of 2, is currently lighting this torch model, obviously, because it's the one that's got the light on it. So that's being lit. But it's also lighting this tile, this section of this tile, this section of this tile, section of this tile. You can see what's being lit, right? But not just the floor, it's lighting this wall, this corner, this bit of wall, anything that's got any bit of light on it, even if it's not full light. For example, this corner here it's not completely lit, it's got shadows in it, but nonetheless, light is hitting it, so that would count. So it's important to understand that when I say that Godot 3.1 has a lighting limit of 8 objects per light, that doesn't mean that this light can only light 8 objects, because clearly it's lighting way more than 8 tiles. What it actually means is that this wall cannot be lit by more than 8 lights, okay? This wall cannot be lit by more than 8 lights. This floor cannot be lit by more than 8 lights. Now, at the moment, that doesn't matter because one light is lighting it. However, let's say I place another one. At the moment, that's okay. But let's say I put it there. Well, now we've got this wall and this wall being lit by 2 lights, because this wall has got the light from this one just here, but it's also got, or sorry, I think let's take a look at that. Yeah, so this light, I believe, is coming from this light source. Let's just check. No, okay. So the brighter bit is coming from the light we just placed, because obviously that's overlaying, would make sense, right? The reason this is brighter here is this is being cast by this light and it's overlaying on the light that was already there. So if we delete that, this will get dimmer. Yeah, that will go back to the normal brightness. But it gets brighter because this light is adding onto, it's additive. It's adding onto the light that's already there. Likewise with these floor tiles here. And you can see, this is the reason why I said that attenuation is a really useful setting. Because when you can see the really hard defined edges of your lights, you can see what's happening with them. So here I can clearly see where overlap is occurring. I can see that these tiles here are going to be problematic eventually because already 2 lights are hitting them. If I had another light over here, now that's 3 lights that are hitting this particular tile. Okay. Now what will happen eventually is when you cross that threshold of 8 lights per object, then artifacting will start to occur. So for example, let's see if I can create that scenario by just placing a few lights around this room that will then take it across that threshold. You can start to see it here. Okay, it's not really happening in the room so much, although it is a little bit, but it's starting to happen outside of the room. So you'll notice these really hard shadows. Okay, if I start to delete these lights, those shadows will soften. In fact, the shadows should fill in because obviously these are lit, so there shouldn't be any shadows. So if I start to remove the lights around this area, notice how the light's filling in. So what's essentially happening is these lights are now starting to work, whereas they were not working before. Too many lights overlapping tiles and objects will mean that the lights stop working properly, and the engine will just struggle to light scenes properly. Okay? So the most important setting you need to be aware of is the range setting. And the reason for that is that this is going to affect how many tiles this light is going to hit. Okay, so if I set this for the moment to 1, we can obviously see a really defined spotlight. I can make this even smaller. Let's do 0.5. Really close. Oh, maybe that's too much. Let's try 0.8. Yeah, so a little goes a long way. So yeah, so let's try 0.8.5 or 0.85. Oh, can we not do that? Okay. All right, well, it's going to have to be 0.9 then. So that's the smallest we can get where we can see the circle. Okay. So if we close the map or save it, and then we'll open it again, it will actually update these lights. Okay. So you can see now that they're kind of only just lighting their own tile. So the maximum amount of lights objects that are being lit now are two, really: the torch and then the floor that the um, torch is on. But also, in this one's case, it's also hitting some of this wall as well. So that needs to be taken into consideration, as does that. But if we place this in this room, now we can have as many as we want right next to one another without hitting that limit, because no, it's not possible for these walls to. I mean, here it is, because obviously there is a bit of a on the wall. It's sort of not sticking to that range. You can see the light on the wall is wider, is a bigger circle than the circle on the ground, so that would overlap. But it's not about that you can't overlap at all. It's just that you can't overlap too much. Okay. So this would probably be okay. And again, the nice thing about seeing these circles is I can start to plan how much light overlap I want. So because I can see these are overlapping, I might go, maybe I'll, to play it safe, and I'll put it there instead. That way I know they're not overlapping, right? But the point is, you can see that I've got all of these lights in here, and I can put them out here, and every single one is working. They're not turning off, they're not dimming, because they're only lighting their own space, okay? However, if I save this map and I change this to 7 or 6, then obviously when I then load this map again, all of those lights are going to be trying to light a huge area. I mean, look, there's bits of light coming over onto this other section of the map over here. But you can also start to see that there's harsh shadows in this room because the lighting is just struggling. It's just struggling to light this room properly. Okay. So range is a very important setting to be very careful with, and also you can see here that there's harsh shadows here that don't look nice. And that's because, again, the engine is struggling to use all of these lights. Range is a very important setting to be careful with, because if I, for example, delete, I'm just trying to think the best way to do this. Let's delete these lights. Just give me a second just to delete these. Again, a bit like attenuation, range goes a long way. So you can see that this light that's got a range of 6 is lighting all of this room and the outside of the room, and it's also lighting a bit of the second map, which means this void here, if I was to place tiles there, those would be lit as well. Yeah. So if I was to have another one of those lights, then because it's such a big range, we're going to get a lot of overlap. The bigger range setting you have, the more overlap across more tiles you're going to have. For example, if I put this light here, I'm now overlapping all of these tiles. So the more tiles you have overlapping, the more heavier it is on the engine to use those lights. So the summary, what I'm trying to get across with this is that be aware that there obviously is this limitation, and it will start, if you have too many lights, it's going to start to mess around with the lighting in your game. The way around it is to use smaller ranged lights. So 2 is a good one, for example, because 2 will light up just the area you want to light. You might even want to use 1 or something like that, but it will just allow you to have a bit more control over where your light hits. So for example, I just want to light this corner of this room here. Now obviously the light is bleeding out and hitting the grass outside, so I'd need to be mindful of that. But I could place a light in all 4 corners of this room, potentially, although the room's not big enough for range 2 to completely do that without overlap. But, it's safe enough to do on a range of 2, because there's a load of tiles in the middle that are not being overlapped. these ones I'd obviously need to be mindful of, but on the whole, that's fine. And then using attenuation of 0 will allow you to really see where your overlapping is occurring. Now, obviously, when you're happy with your lights, so let's say I'm happy with that, then you can go in after the fact, save your map, obviously, go in after the fact into your light and put this back to 1. So once you've placed your lights and you're happy with them, when you then reload your map, the lighting will be realistic, right? But use attenuation 0 when you're placing your lights so that you can actually see what effect the range is having on how many tiles are going to be overlapping the light, because that's what you need to be careful of, okay? And you can use wide range lights, but you should use them sparingly and make sure that no other lights are overlapping a wide range light. So if I had a light here that was 5, I'd need to be very careful about having other lights around it, especially lights with the same range, but even lights with a smaller range, because you'd need to treat that wide range light as, a light that's going to cover that area, right? So you just need to be careful with the overlap. So when you are, as I say, placing your lights, make sure you're using this setting here. Set it to 0 when you're placing them, so that way you can see the limits of your light, the full limit of your light, and what is being hit by it, and what other lights are also making concentric circles, if you know what I mean. So that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid overlap, okay? Now, something else you need to be very careful of, this is not going to apply to most general RPG in a box users, but if you're using Blockbench, you need to pay attention to this. Some people will make a huge model in Blockbench and use that as their, map, for example. So you could go into Blockbench and you could make a house, for example, in Blockbench. You could then import that into RPG in a box and make that a single asset, right? And that's your, map, for example. You could make a map in Blockbench. The thing you need to be very careful with that, though, is that's treated as a single object, okay? So let's say, for example, let's pretend that this room was not made out of voxel assets, it wasn't made out of tiles. I'd imported it from Blockbench. So all of this is one model, okay? If I grab this torch and I place this, that now counts as one of the 8 lights for the whole object. So if I put a light here, even though it's not touching, this is still one object because the whole thing is a Blockbench mesh. So this is already now 2 lights. Now this is a small map, so I could probably get away with putting a light there, a light there, a light there, and a light there, for example. And even though it's one object, it would still work. But if you've got a huge map and your lights are not filling it, you could very well hit the limitation very quickly and your map is not lighting properly because you made it one big object, and Godot 3.1 has a limit of how many lights one object can receive, 8. So at the moment you have more than 8 lights on your large map, if it's a single asset, you're going to run into that limitation. That's where that limitation literally comes in. The advantage we have with RPG in a box is that our assets are broken up. So when I place this light here, for example, this tile is not connected to this tile. They're treated as separate objects. So this light can receive its own light source, and this one is not currently being lit, so it's fine. So I can have a light here that lights that light, that tile, fine. And because this light is not touching these tiles, it doesn't have the limitation. But if this was all one object, this now counts as 2 lights for the entire thing. So you just need to be very mindful if you're going to be using Blockbench to make large models that cover a wider area, you're going to be able to put less lights on that on those models. When it comes to complexity of models, so for example, if you had a character with multiple voxels in, the voxel count does not matter, okay? The complexity of your models has no bearing on the light limitation, because when you save a model, the amount of voxels in the model does not matter because it's rendered down into a single mesh. So that is the limitations you need to be aware of. So my advice is when you're making lights and you're placing lights in your maps, number one, use range. Let me go back to my model, the light. Use the range sparingly. Lean towards smaller ranged lights because you can have more of them. They're going to have less of an effect on the. You're going to encounter the limitation less if you have a smaller range, because a smaller range means that you can avoid the overlap, right? Higher range means that light is going to be hitting so many more things, so you're going to have to avoid. You're then going to have to be very mindful of not having the smaller lights or other large lights creating an overlap. So basically, a bigger range is going to create more instances where there could be an overlap. So avoid that by using smaller, tighter ranges. You can use large range, but just use it sparingly. And then the other setting to use when you're placing lights is to lower this down to 0, or 0.01 in this case, so that you can see the edges of your lights, so you can see what area a light is lighting, so you can then plan the placement of your lights better. You can, because you've got the attenuation really low, as I say, you can now see the actual limits of that light. So I now know to avoid that circle, right? If I don't want overlap, I now know where I need to place this light. So here, for example, I now know that none of the tiles that this light is hitting are going to be affected by this light. So if I put that there, it's safe, right? And then when I've placed it, once you're happy with the placement of your lights, as I say, you can go back into the model, increase the attenuation back to 1, so it looks realistic, but use a really low 0 attenuation when you're placing your lights so that you can make sure that you're not going to hit this limitation, okay? So now when I save this map and reopen it, the light will look better. Yeah. And I now know that those lights are going to be safe because I know they're not overlapping. It's difficult with an attenuation like this to truly see whether they are overlapping or not. Obviously, it kind of looks like they're not, but you just want to be absolutely sure that this bit here in the middle, they're not touching or overlapping. So use that real harsh attenuation when you're placing them to make sure that they're not touching at all, and then you know you're going to be safe, okay? So that's the limitation. That's how to, work around it, be aware of it, what it's actually all about, and all of that. So if you ever find that you're working with lights and some lights are just not showing properly, they're even though the light is, this torch has got a light source, but it's apparently off because it's not lighting a tile, then chances are you've got too many overlapping lights, and you're hitting that limit. So you need to, reduce the amount of lights in your map, start messing around with the range setting and all of that. Again, I will just reiterate, the energy setting, the brightness, has no bearing on the limitation at all. You can have these full bright. What matters is the range, okay? Because it's about how many objects have been lit, not how bright. So if I place that light there, even though these tiles here are really bright, what really matters is that none of this light is hitting these, right? That's all that matters. So energy is fine. Oh, another thing I should mention as well, I found something else out about limitations that I should quickly talk about. If I place a lot of these lights, let's put the range up again so that well, actually, let's just place a load of lights until we get some artifacting, i.e. shadows that shouldn't be there, like these squares here. That's fine. So this is the limitation coming into effect. Okay, you can see it here. These tiles should be lit, but we're getting these weird square shadows, right? That's because the engine is struggling to render all of these lights now because they're too close together and they're overlapping all these tiles. So one thing I found that does work, your mileage may vary, is if you select a set of lights and group them. So we'll call these lights 1. Okay. If you then hide that group, watch these shadows. Oh, he says. It might actually, the artifacting might be coming from these actually. So let's delete this group. And let's think about this. Let's select these. And add these to a group. And then hide that. Yeah. So you can see that when I hide lights, it will fix the rendering issue. So what that tells me is that when you hide groups, it will not render the light if they're in a hidden group. So feasibly, one way around the light limitation, if you want to use this amount of lights for whatever reason, one way around the limitation would be to group your lights per room. And then as you walk around your map in game, hide and show groups of lights. And then that way you might mitigate some of the limitations, okay? Because it's clearly showing that if you hide and show lights, it will have an effect on how many lights are working and not working. So if one way around the limitation, another way would be to group certain lights and hide them and show them as you walk around the map. You're going to have to play around with that. That might be more time consuming than it would be to just plan your lights out better. But I mention it in case it's useful, okay? Anyway, so that's light sources and limitations of them. So now let's take a quick look at scripting light sources. So ahead of time, I've made this model. It's a torch, and it's got a light source, which is a spotlight. So let's just go find the light source option. Here it is. So it's a spotlight. It's got a white color, energy free, range is 100. Now with spotlights, range can be a bit more forgiving because you actually need a big range. Because obviously in this case it's going to be casting the light out. We could lower this a bit. I'm going to leave it at 100 for now, but you'll see in game there's probably a bit too much, but you're going to need a big range anyway because you need this light to cast out in a single direction and obviously be effective. Omnidirectional lights light things up a bit easier than spotlights do. So with spotlight, you're going to need to take into account that it's only lighting in one direction. So you're going to want a range, a sizable range for that. Spotlights, because they're only in a single direction, will be less intense on the limitations than the omnidirectional lights will be. So another way around the limitation, if you want, is to use spotlights instead and point the light at the ground so it lights the ground up. But obviously remember that because it's a spotlight, it won't light these walls. It will just light the floor. So again, mileage may vary, but you can play around with that. So torch model here, as I say, it's got a spotlight on it. It's got an attach point, which is called right_hand, because I'm going to use the default equipment system for this. I've got an item setup, which is torch. I'm going to make it equipable. I'm going to give it the tag weapon, so it can go into my right hand in the default equipment system. And I'm going to make a script, which will allow us to turn the flashlight on and off. Okay, so I'm going to make a new script called flashlight. And it's going to contain the following code. We're going to grab the attached item. So player.attachment right hand. That's going to give us the torch model. And then if $item dot is that what I want to do? I think for now I'm just going to keep it simple. We need a global property. I think I've already set one up. Let me just go to my game configuration, global properties. Oh, did I put it on? I put it on the 3D model, I put a custom property here, which is emitting true. So what we need to do is, in our script, we've grabbed the attachment. We need to check if the property emitting is equal to true. If it is, then we want to set entity light enabled $item, that's our torch, because we've grabbed it from the attachment right hand, and we want to turn it off, so false. So don't enable the light. And then we're obviously going to change the property emitting to match the fact that it's no longer emitting. Else, and then we're going to obviously want to do the opposite. We want to set entity light enabled $item true, turn the light on, and set the fact that the light is now on by changing the property end. And that's our very simple torch script. There's more that we could add. Like, for example, we could check that it's equipped. It's actually in the equipment slot before you toggle it. But for now, just keeping it simple just to show you how you would create a toggleable light source. So if we apply and save that, if we go to the Visual Script Editor, these are the nodes that control the light. Set entity light enabled. It will be the entity that the light is on, in this case the torch, and then disabled or enabled for the state. Okay, so this will turn it off, this will turn it on. So if we go into game, so here we are in the game. So if let's turn nav on so I can see where the navigation grids are that I can walk along. So if I now open up my inventory and my equipment and I equip the torch, you can see that as I walk around, it's casting that light, the spotlight. Now, this is what I mean by the range 100. I could probably adjust. It's a bit of a far-reaching torch. It's a very strong torch, but you get the idea. It's lighting. Now, again, you need to be careful because in this case, the light of my torch is now going to be lighting the same tiles that this torch is, flaming torch is also lighting. So again, that will be an amount of objects that are being lit, in this case, by 2 light sources. So again, you need to be mindful of dynamic lights as well, and what are those hitting. So again, just take into consideration all the lights you have in your game. The point is, the limitation means you can't just, place loads and loads of lights in your game in abandon. You have to be strategic about lights in RPG in a Box, okay? Mainly because of Godot 3.1, not specifically because of RPG in a Box, but because it uses Godot 3.1, it has this limitation. Anyway, so we've now got this torch, and I've realized we didn't attach the script. But we've got the torch working by equipping it. So what I'm going to do now is go to Game Configuration, go to Input Bindings, add a key. There you go, add binding. F for flashlight, run script, and let's run our flashlight script. So every time you press F, it will toggle the light on and off. Now, at the moment, as I say, it's not checking if the flashlight is actually equipped, so you would want to put that safeguard in place, but just to get it simply set up. So as we walk around, there's the flashlight, and if I press F, the flashlight turns off, press F again, turns on. Each time I press F, I can toggle it on and off. Okay, so that's a very simple script that actually changes the state of a light source on a model at runtime. Okay. Just to quickly show you, I'm not going to go into any specific examples, but just to show you the other light scripts you have available to you. You can ignore these. These are all to do with the lighting on the map, but everything from here downwards, anything that says set entity light, that's all to do with light sources. So this is going to be the attenuation, which is that hard circle I was showing you earlier. So you can change that at runtime, so you could soften the circle if you wanted to during your game. Set the color of a light source. So if you wanted a light to go from white to green when you press a button, for example, you can do that. Diameter is another word for range, so this will change the range of a light. Again, be careful with that because even at runtime, the more tiles this light hits, you'll get glitches in your game. So again, even though this, will change the range, you're going to want to use that sparingly and take into account what lights that's now going to hit if it does. Light intensity is the energy value. So that's, we go to the light settings. Intensity is energy. So whatever this value is, this is going to change that. So if you want your light to be brighter, that's energy intensity, light intensity. And then obviously we've seen that one that turns the light on and off. So that will just toggle off and on this option here, essentially. And then the group lighting. So if you had a group of these, so if I placed all these lights down, that one there and that one there, and then I selected them all, and I turned them into a group called lights, okay, then when you use this node or this function, you would put your group name in here, lights, and then you would say green, for example, and then a fade duration, let's say 5, and then over 5 seconds, all of the lights in this group, in this case 3, will fade over 5 seconds from white to green. Okay, so if you want to affect a whole load of lights at once, put them in a group and use this node to do that, or this function, group light color. And then this is the same, but it will turn off all the lights in that group. So if I wanted all of these torches to turn off at once and then on at once, put them in a group and then just reference that group and tell that group of lights to turn on or off. Okay, so those can be quite useful. Okay, but in essence, that is the scripting functionality that you have for lights. And that will bring us to the end of this video on light sources, how to use them, how to be mindful of the limitations with them, and how to work with them in scripts. So hopefully this video has been useful and has given you a good insight into lighting in RPG in a Box and how to use them effectively in your projects. With that said, that'll wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more tutorials.